On this edition of Fine Spun Tales, we are looking at The Player of Games, the second book published in the Culture Universe by Ian M. Banks. This is video 2 in a series of 3. If you like the book, there is a link in the description to buy a copy. Narration is generated with tools from OpenAI. Section 2. Gurgeh is traveling on the Limiting Factor, a stripped-down military ship feeling an unexpected sense of distance and isolation as the vessel accelerates through ultraspace. Despite having traveled extensively before, he finds the silence and eerie stillness of the ship disconcerting. The Limiting Factor, moving rapidly yet almost silently, gives Gurgeh a sense of falseness and detachment from reality. He explores the ship, feeling like a component in its circuitry, and is struck by the quiet and the ship's seemingly dormant state. During his exploration, Gurgeh comes across a massive game board in an old effector blister, a reminder of his mission to learn and master the game Azad. As he contemplates the daunting task ahead, he is approached by a remote drone informing him that they have reached their maximum velocity in ultraspace and will rendezvous with the GSV Little Rascal in 102 days. The drone also mentions that the ship will soon be able to start playing Azad, but Gurgeh, needing more time to prepare, requests to delay starting the game. Gurgeh insists on using his terminal for privacy instead of the ship's internal monitoring system. After the drone leaves, he reflects on the enormous task of learning Azad and the significant changes ahead, feeling a mixture of anticipation and apprehension as he prepares for the challenges of the game and the journey. Gurgeh spends 30 days immersed in learning the complex game of Azad without touching a single piece. He delves into its history, theory, and the intricate moves of the pieces, pushing himself to the limits of endurance. Sleeping only a few hours each night, he remains focused on the game, relying on the ship, the Limiting Factor, for guidance. The ship, once a war vessel, now finds a new purpose in teaching Gurgeh, who is overwhelmed by the game's complexity and biotechnological pieces that defy his understanding. He struggles with the biotech pieces, which change unpredictably and seem inscrutable despite his efforts. The Limiting Factor suggests he focus on the subsidiary games to gain better control over the biotechs in later stages. Gurgeh follows this advice and makes some progress, but he often feels frustrated and isolated, unsure if he can master the game. He takes occasional breaks to explore the warship, finding it stark and utilitarian compared to the more luxurious civilian craft he is accustomed to. As time passes, Gurgeh starts to grasp the biotech's nuances and integrates them into his strategy. He also learns more about the Empire of Azad, finding it a complex and contradictory society held together by the game. His daily routine includes swimming under a simulated starry sky, and he dreams vividly about his past, feeling both guilty and relieved as his connections with friends back home fade. After over 3 months of intense preparation, the Limiting Factor makes its rendezvous with the GSV Little Rascal. Gurgeh, initially confused by the sudden change in scenery, realizes he is now part of an immense spacecraft. The sheer scale of the GSV amazes him, and he prepares to continue his journey toward mastering Azad, understanding that the stakes and his challenges have only just begun. Gurgeh spends 500 days on the Little Rascal, a contact ship, learning the game of Azad while traveling towards the region of the clouds. During this time, he mingles with the crew, both those running the ship and others hitching rides or waiting for their vessels. Despite numerous social invitations, Gurgeh often prefers solitude, dedicating himself to studying the intricacies of Azad and learning the imperial language Aechic, suspecting it holds clues to mastering the game. On board, he meets a tiny library drone named Flare Imsaho, which unsettles him due to its resemblance to a game piece. Gurgeh initially distrusts the drone, but eventually learns it is harmless and meant to assist him in navigating the social and linguistic complexities of the Empire of Azad. He stays updated with news from home, including the exploits of his acquaintances and developments in their lives. As the journey progresses, Gurgeh receives detailed briefings from Flare Imsaho and the Limiting Factor on the Empire's social structure and customs. The culture ship finally reaches A, where Gurgeh is subject to the scrutiny of Imperial officers. They are unimpressed by his ship's lack of traditional command structures and are suspicious of its capabilities. Gurgeh feels out of place amid the formalities of the Empire, where even his host drone must disguise itself as an older, less advanced model to meet the locals' expectations. His initial interactions are awkward, characterized by a sense of foreignness and the realization of how disciplined and hierarchical Azadian society is compared to the culture. Upon arrival in the capital city of Grosnachek, Gurgeh is greeted with formal ceremonies and a banquet. He navigates the elaborate social rituals with the help of Flair Imsaho, who advises him on proper conduct and speech. Despite some misunderstandings and a sense of being patronized, Gurgeh manages to make a reasonable impression. Gurgeh is then taken to his accommodations, a module from the limiting factor parked on the roof of a prestigious hotel, blending his need for security and familiarity with the local customs of hospitality. As he settles in, Gurgeh prepares for the challenges of integrating into this complex society and competing in the game of Azad. Gurgeh, along with the drone Flair Imsaho and Lo Pequel, observes a shantytown from a module's balcony. Pequel explains that the shantytown houses people driven from the countryside by an unfair property tax system. Pequel shares the good news that Gurgeh has been granted permission to follow the main series games to Ekronidol, the fire planet. Gurgeh thanks Pequel, feeling honored. Later in the module, Flair Imsaho helps Gurgeh prepare for a grand ball, cautioning him about the bugged robe. They discuss the lack of culture insignia and the amusing yet risky anthem used at ceremonies. Gurgeh learns that Contact has overhyped his game-playing abilities to the Empire, intending to use him to keep them content. Despite the drone's doubts about his skills, Gurgeh remains confident, having deliberately concealed his full potential during practice. Gurgeh feels a sense of secrecy and independence from Contact, determined to perform better than expected. He acknowledges the subtle game he's playing against Contact, keeping his true abilities hidden as a small act of defiance. As he prepares for the upcoming challenges, Gurgeh takes a moment to relax, contemplating the complexities of his situation and the strategic layers of the grander game he's involved in. The Great Palace of Grosnachek, situated by a broad, murky river, hosts a grand ball for the prominent players of Azad. Jernal Morat Gurgeh arrives at the palace, traveling through tree-lined boulevards in a ground car with his companions, Pequel and the disguised drone, Flair Imsaho. The palace, less immense than expected, is still impressive with its ornate decorations and thousands of candles representing the game's participants. Inside, the lavishly dressed attendees and the opulent decorations give the palace an archaic charm that strikes Gurgeh as out of sync with its technological advancements. The ball is a spectacle of wealth and power, with guests flaunting extravagant attire and jewelry. Gurgeh feels the heat and discomfort of his heavy robe, but is intrigued by the magnificence around him. As he navigates the palace, he encounters Shohoboham Za, a fellow culture member, who offers Gurgeh a drink and some candid advice about the Empire and its people. Za's animated personality and disregard for formalities provide a stark contrast to the rigid customs of the Azadians. During the evening, Gurgeh and Pequel anxiously await an introduction to Emperor Regent Nikasar. The Emperor, surrounded by a retinue and exotic animals, finally arrives, displaying a subdued demeanor. Gurgeh, advised by Flair Imsaho to kneel on one knee, inadvertently shows a unique form of respect that amuses the Emperor, earning him a peculiar distinction. As the ball continues, Shohoboham Za reappears and engages Gurgeh in conversation about the Empire's unique blend of savagery and sophistication. Za warns Gurgeh about the dangers of betting and romantic entanglements, emphasizing the Empire's complex social dynamics. Despite his earlier bravado, Za seems to appreciate the Empire's grandeur and warns Gurgeh to be cautious. The night ends with a mix of awe and apprehension as Gurgeh contemplates the intricacies of Azadian society. The rigid traditions, power dynamics, and the looming presence of the Emperor leave a lasting impression on him, setting the stage for his upcoming participation in the great game of Azad. Gurgeh wanders around feeling angry and uncomfortable, surrounded by people he considers failures, including himself. Contact sent him on this mission with an outdated warship, an inexperienced young drone, and inadequate information. Once romantic, the journey now feels like a burden, and Gurgeh feels out of place in the seedy empire. At a ballroom, he meets Trinev Dudley's daughter, a female game player. Their conversation reveals the rigid social system that makes it difficult for lesser sexes to succeed in the game Azad. During their exchange, Trinev expresses her slim hopes of advancing in the game due to the biases against female players. Gurgeh sympathizes with her but feels helpless. As they walk back to her father, Trinev discreetly assures Gurgeh that he will win, hinting at deeper knowledge. This encounter leaves Gurgeh thoughtful and slightly disturbed, especially when he realizes the location of a hidden bug on his robe. In the days leading up to his first game of Azad, Gurgeh isolates himself, practicing maneuvers with the limiting factor and avoiding further social functions. He spends time alone, contemplating the chaotic and unplanned architecture of Grosnacek, contrasting it with the elegance of the ship Little Rascal. The city's disarray mirrors his own sense of dislocation and unease as he prepares for the challenge ahead. On the day of his first serious match, Gurgeh wakes up feeling elated. He eats little, dresses in ceremonial garments, and is taken to the game hall by Pequel in an official car. The city is buzzing with game fever as thousands of players, including the Emperor Regent Nikosar, prepare for their games. Despite his initial excitement, Gurgeh feels nervous as he enters the hall. His drone, Flare Imsaho, is not allowed to stay during the game. Gurgeh meets his 9 opponents and starts the game cautiously, eventually gaining the most points by midday. He feels confident after winning a couple of smaller games in the afternoon. In the evening, Gurgeh discusses strategies with the ship limiting factor, despite the long communication delay. He feels optimistic about his chances, but the following day he realizes he has underestimated his opponents. A coordinated attack led by a priest puts him in a dire position. The priest asks Gurgeh to concede, but he decides to continue. That night, Gurgeh struggles to sleep, replaying the game in his mind. He contacts the ship again, seeking advice, and learns that while his situation is nearly impossible, there are still ways to win. This gives him hope, and he devises a plan. The next day, Gurgeh returns to the game with a renewed strategy. He confuses his opponents with contradictory moves, causing them to make mistakes. As the priest rushes to attack, Gurgeh reveals hidden cards that devastate the priest's forces. Seizing the moment, Gurgeh capitalizes on the chaos, defeating several players and turning the tide of the game. By the end of the day, he has not only saved himself from elimination, but also taken the lead. The priest, stunned by the turnaround, leaves without a word. After his victory, Gurgeh becomes the center of attention, with reporters and admirers crowding around him. Pequel congratulates him and suggests a press conference, but Gurgeh refuses, preferring to rest and focus on the next match. That night, despite a tense exchange with Flare Imsaho, Gurgeh decides to accept an invitation from Shobaham Za to celebrate. As they drive through the city, Za praises Gurgeh's unexpected triumph, lifting his spirits as they toast to his success. The whole, once on the city's outskirts, has become a part of an urban district, filled with vast artificial caverns originally used to store natural gas. Now it is a crowded place inhabited by the city's poor, criminals, and outcasts, including aliens. Gurgeh and Za arrive in this chaotic, noisy environment and descend into its depths via a massive, spiraling ramp. They exit their car in a long tunnel filled with vehicles and people moving through the crowd toward a glowing tunnel. As they navigate through the bustling, diverse crowd, Gurgeh feels invisible, unlike his usual conspicuous self. They eventually enter a large, brightly lit cavern, teeming with stalls, kiosks, and makeshift buildings. The vibrant atmosphere is filled with a mix of people and activity. Za guides Gurgeh to a quieter, wood-lined tunnel and then into a loud, smoky club, where a performance involving a mud wrestling match is taking place on stage. Inside the club, Za and Gurgeh sit with 2 charming Azadian females, Inkle and Atsen, who entertain Gurgeh with witty conversation and games. The atmosphere is lively, with various acts performed on stage, but Gurgeh is more focused on the company and the escape from his usual life. As the night progresses, Inkle seeks Gurgeh's help to rescue Atsen from her ex-master who has taken her away. Gurgeh follows Inklate through a maze of corridors and crowded rooms until they find Atsen being held by her ex-master, an apex. After a tense confrontation, the apex flees, leaving Atsen distraught. Gurgeh comforts her, and they retreat to a small mirrored room where Inklate and Atsen find solace in his presence. Shohobohamza bursts into the mirrored room, breaking the glass and revealing a hidden camera. Gurgeh, Inklate, and Atsen are startled, but Za quickly assesses the situation, confirming the camera is only a recorder. They escape through the club, navigating dark passages and avoiding pursuers, eventually crashing onto a stage during a performance. After a chaotic encounter, they make their way to safety. In a small bar, Za dismantles the camera, revealing it was used to gather leverage against Gurgeh. They discuss the motives behind the setup, concluding it was the state's insurance to control Gurgeh's actions. Despite the tension, Za is amused and determined to seek retribution against Inklate and Atsen, while Gurgeh contemplates the manipulation they faced. The next day, Gurgeh competes in a high-stakes game, facing multiple opponents who initially gang up on him. Public and imperial pressure shifts the dynamic, allowing Gurgeh to focus and gradually dominate the game. Despite accusations of cheating, he prevails, and both he and his drone companion, Flare Imsaho, reflect on the challenges and perceptions they must navigate in this competitive environment. Gurgeh enters a critical game on the board of Becoming. The priest, aiming for second place, files a special objective plan with the adjudicator. Despite initial caution, Gurgeh finds little resistance from the other players, even from the priest, leading him to a decisive raid into the priest's territory. The priest falters, and Gurgeh ends the session in a dominant position. After a break, other players attack Gurgeh, who then strategically allows the priest to regain some ground. The game concludes with Gurgeh victorious, the others confined to minor areas, and the priest securing second place. Outside the hall, Pekwil urges Gurgeh to address the media, but Gurgeh refuses, focused solely on playing the game. During the night, Gurgeh discusses his philosophical premises with the ship, Limiting Factor, which insists Gurgeh needs to register his beliefs for the Imperial Game Bureau. Gurgeh is reluctant, claiming he has no strong beliefs, but the ship advises him to fabricate acceptable premises to avoid trouble. Gurgeh decides to let the ship draft his premises, aiming to balance truth and expediency. The next day, Gurgeh is summoned to the palace, where he meets Loshav Olos, who advises him to be vague in his premises to avoid controversy. Gurgeh agrees and later faces Lo Wesekibold Ram, a top-ranked player, in the second round. Their intense matches draw significant media attention, but Gurgeh remains indifferent to the press and their increasingly hostile coverage. Despite the strain, Gurgeh holds his own against Ram, showcasing his strategic prowess. As the competition progresses, the media's portrayal of Gurgeh becomes more negative, depicting him as a threat to the empire. They speculate about his connection with the Limiting Factor and criticize his use of drugs. Gurgeh finds these accusations absurd and amusing, but the hostility reflects the empire's unease with his success and the values he represents. Despite the media's campaign against him, Gurgeh remains focused on his goal, mastering the game. Gurgeh is poised to win the game on the board of Becoming against Ram after 4 days. As they leave the big tent for the day, a crowd awaits them outside. Some people are there to see the alien, while others are either protesting or cheering for Gurgeh. As Gurgeh navigates through the crowd with his companions, he feels tense and sees everything around him as part of the game. Suddenly, Gurgeh senses something wrong and instinctively ducks and rolls to avoid an attack. 3 people burst through the crowd, causing chaos. Gurgeh is knocked down, and explosions and loud noises fill the air. As he struggles under the weight of an attacker, he sees Pekwil injured and realizes he himself is unhurt, but covered in someone else's blood. The attackers are subdued by the police, and one of them lies dead. Shohobohamza helps Gurgeh up and explains that the attackers were likely Imperial secret police. In the aftermath, Za explains to Gurgeh that someone in a position of power likely wants him dead because he is winning the game against Ram. Gurgeh is frustrated by the constant deception and lack of information from those around him. They return to their module, where Za indulges in a drink and tries to lighten the mood, while Gurgeh contemplates the gravity of the situation. The next day, Gurgeh finishes his game against Ram with ease. Despite Peckwheel being wounded in the previous day's attack, he attends the game and congratulates Gurgeh on his victory. Gurgeh is transported by aircraft due to the increased security risk. Back in his module, he learns that his next game will start immediately, leaving him no time to rest. Despite his frustration, he prepares for the next challenge, determined to continue his winning streak. Gurgeh faces his old opponent, the priest Lin Goforiev Tunes, with a confident smile as they meet in the hall for their game. Despite the priest's unconvincing attempt to return the gesture, Gurgeh's spirits soar, and he maintains his composure even when Tunes loses and reacts angrily. Winning his subsequent matches against other players, Gurgeh is buoyed by his success and feels a mix of exhaustion and jubilation as he advances to the next stage. Throughout the matches, Gurgeh experiences a range of intense emotions, from the thrill of victory to the fear of potential mistakes. Despite concerns about the Empire's attempts to disqualify him, he remains focused and determined. His strategy includes exploiting rivalries among his opponents, which helps him secure his wins. Meanwhile, his companion drone, Flare Imsaho, struggles with being confined, and Gurgeh reassures it while staying focused on his goal. As Gurgeh prepares for the final stages, he is equipped with a tiny beacon and communicator to ensure his safety. The ship, limiting factor, stands ready to rescue him if necessary, despite the risks involved. Gurgeh's confidence and determination remain unshaken as he faces the upcoming challenges, feeling a thrilling anticipation for the next phase of the competition. In a conference center near the shuttle port, Jernau Gurgeh faces Loprines Bermoya, a Supreme Court judge of A, who moves with a graceful ease reminiscent of someone from the culture. During the lesser games, Bermoya's deliberate style makes Gurgeh nervous, but he adapts using body drugs and manages to keep up. After 7 days of play, Bermoya slightly leads. When they switch to the Board of Origin, Bermoya proposes a high-stakes wager of castration against Apicial gelding, which Gurgeh reluctantly accepts despite his fear. As the game progresses, Bermoya's skill is highlighted by the news services, with Gurgeh often sharing headlines with the formidable Nikosar. Gurgeh, despite his increasing respect for Bermoya, contemplates the severe consequences of losing the wager. He struggles with the moral dilemma of potentially mutilating Bermoya if he wins. The reality of Azad's seductive power overwhelms him, making it hard to accept defeat despite the personal cost. That night, Gurgeh is taken by the drone Flare Imsaho on a tour of the city, exposing the brutal realities of the Empire. He witnesses extreme poverty, violence, and the dehumanizing treatment of its citizens. The tour culminates in viewing restricted media channels that showcase the sadistic and exploitative nature of the ruling elite. Gurgeh is horrified but cannot look away, realizing the extent of the Empire's cruelty. Back in the module, Gurgeh reflects on the drone's revelations and the cultural differences between the Empire and the culture. He is disturbed by the thought of the Empire's manipulation and the stakes of his game. He understands that his actions in the game have far-reaching implications, but he is driven by an insatiable desire to win. Unable to sleep, Gurgeh returns to the lounge and immerses himself in analyzing his game with Bermoya. He watches the gameplay, pondering his next moves and the consequences of the wager. The night's revelations weigh heavily on him, but he remains determined to continue, fueled by the drive to see how far the game will take him before it either throws him off or consumes him completely. A prison ambulance stands outside the conference center. Gurgeh exits an aircraft and heads straight into the game hall, with Pequel hurrying to keep up. Gurgeh, seemingly unfazed and silent throughout the journey, faces off against Loprines Bermoya on the Board of Origin. As they play, Bermoya struggles to understand Gurgeh's chaotic and seemingly purposeless moves, which start to show a subtle, unpredictable strategy. As the game progresses, Bermoya becomes increasingly uneasy. Despite his confidence and long experience, he finds himself unable to counter Gurgeh's unexpected and fierce moves. By the end of the afternoon session, Bermoya is mentally and physically overwhelmed, leading to his collapse. Paramedics carry him away, leaving Pequel astonished at the judge's breakdown in front of Gurgeh. After the match, Gurgeh, silent as ever, reviews the games he has played since his arrival. He is set to join the other winners on a journey to the fire planet, Ekrondal, while dealing with intense scrutiny and negative press. Gurgeh starts indulging in the Imperial military broadcasts, showing gruesome acts of violence, which Flarium Saho, his drone companion, finds troubling. Invited to Rector Hammond's estate, Gurgeh spends the next 15 days amidst luxury and political intrigue. Hammond and his guests attempt to bribe Gurgeh into withdrawing from the game, offering him the island and all its pleasures. Gurgeh, however, remains non-committal, focusing on the upcoming games while navigating their advances and threats. Gurgeh's stay is marked by intense discussions about the differences between the culture and the Empire. He reflects on the Empire's harsh laws and enjoys the decadent hospitality without indulging in its excesses. Returning to the hotel module, Gurgeh prepares for the trip to Ekronadal, ready to face the next round of the game. As the shuttle departs for the fire planet, Gurgeh looks back at the city below. The chaotic patterns and disarray momentarily seem peaceful from a distance, a fitting metaphor for his complex and tumultuous journey through the Empire of Azad. That concludes Part 2 of 3, where we cover The Player of Games, a culture novel by Ian M. Banks. If you like this story, the book fills in many details with a lot of world building. Check the description for a link to buy a copy. If you want to help support the channel, consider buying a copy of our app, Count Currency, on iPhone, published by Finespun Software. Join us in Part 3 for the final 2 sections of the novel. Thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day.